It's Friday, December 2nd, 2022. My name is Ashton Ellett. I'm joined behind the camera this afternoon by Alex Stevens, doctoral candidate in history at the University of Michigan. We're here in Memphis, Tennessee at the home of Mr. Lang Whitaker. A native of Atlanta, Mr. Whitaker graduated from North Fulton High School before attending the University of Georgia. A professional writer by trade, he worked at Creative Loafing, Atlanta's venerable arts, culture, and society newspaper. In 2000, he joined the staff of the New York City-based Slam, a hip-hop-infused magazine focused on basketball, as writer and editor. In addition to his work at Slam, Lang served as editor-in-chief of Striker, a magazine of American soccer from 2006 to 2008. From 2008 to 2010, he penned a regular column for Hawks.com, the official website of the NBA's Atlanta Hawks. He also provided color commentary for radio broadcasts for Hawks games during the 2008-09 season. From 2011 to 2013, he was NBA writer for GQ, and he joined the staff of NBA Digital in 2013, where he wrote for NBA.com, co-hosted the Hang Time podcast, and appeared regularly on NBA TV. He is currently general manager of Grizz Gaming and regular contributor to both Grind City Media and GQ. His work can be read in numerous national and regional outlets, and his book, In the Time of Bobby Cox, The Atlanta Braves, Their Manager, My Couch, 2 Decades and Me, was published by Scribner & Sons in 2011. Lang, thanks for inviting us to your home and taking time out of your ridiculously busy schedule. Are you sure there are only 24 hours in your day?
Some days it doesn't feel like it.
I'm sure. It's one of those time compression, elasticity, what is that? Relativity questions, yeah. Right? So you're a native Atlantan. Tell me, where'd you grow up? What was Atlanta like?
I was born at Piedmont Hospital. I grew up in Buckhead, Garden Hills.
Okay, yeah.
My parents had a house there and still are in the same house.
Oh, wow.
Before MARTA had the trains through town, I think they thought the original train line was going to run basically through where their house is, and so someone got wind of that, was selling their house. My parents bought the house, then MARTA ended up changing the plans. So the house stayed there. So I went to Garden Hills Elementary School, which is right around the corner, and basically grew up all around there. I had a lot of friends who lived around that area, kind of between Peachtree and Piedmont and down in the Buckhead area of Atlanta. So now it's funny when I hear people say oh, we're going out to Buckhead, and Buckhead's this fancy place, to us it was just kind of a little part of Atlanta where we lived. My dad actually grew up in the same area in the 30s, 40s in Atlanta. So he saw, probably way more changes than I saw.
Right. So what did your parents do for a living?
My dad worked there was a men's clothing store called Muses in Atlanta, MUSE''S. They had probably 10 to 12 locations around Atlanta. There's one in Lenox Square. There was a building downtown, right by 5 Points, which is still there. He sort of ran their computer systems, which was in everything from payroll to stock, how much clothes they had, all these different things. So he worked at the downtown location for most of my life, and then when I kind of got high school, college, he was at Lenox for a while, Lenox Square.
Yeah.
So which was a lot closer to our house. So that's what he did the whole time. My mom worked at our church, Second Ponce de Leon Baptist Church. It's on the corner of Peachtree and East Wesley, right there in Buckhead. And she was, they had a preschool there. She ran the preschool. She was actually a math major in college, worked at Bell South.
Okay.
And then when I was born, she left, took some time off. And then I started going to the preschool at the church there. She started working there somehow. I don't even know exactly what her job was. And then she eventually ran the preschool for a long time. And the woman who was the children's minister at the church left, and my mom became the children's minister at the church. So she was the children's minister at the church for 20-something years. She retired 7-8 years ago.
So your family is pretty active in the church?
Yeah, very much so. Yeah, grew up at that church, Second Ponce, right there in Buckhead.
So, the joke always goes that the nastiest, dirtiest sporting events are church league softball games.
I played.
Was that your experience as well?
I played softball later, but when I was a kid. I played basketball, and that was kind of where I first played basketball. And I went to public school,
right?
So when I got to like middle school, I actually started playing basketball against like a wider range of kids.
Right, instead of just
The kids from
neighborhood
Garden
kid.
Hills and Buckhead. So when I was a kid and playing in those leagues, I was like, wow, I'm pretty good. Like I might, might have a future doing this. And then I got to middle school, I'm like, oh, okay, no, this is not how it's going to be the rest of my life. But I played church league stuff forever. Our church had a big gym. They had like just a gym, and then when I was like in middle school, they tore the gym down and they called it a family life center, a big fitness place, with
Wow.
multiple basketball courts. They used it to have like all churches now have contemporary services, they call it, where they don't use organs for all the music, and they had one of those.
All the words are up on the projector.
Yeah, all that stuff, PowerPoint presentations, guitars, all that stuff. But they built this big family life center, and I ended up working there when I was in high school. They had the kids basketball leagues on Saturdays and Sundays, and I would kind of like run the leagues on Saturday mornings. So we were really involved in the church, and I was there all the time.
Sounds like the Upward Bound basketball league where they're on the carpeted courts.
Yeah.
Everything.
So and when I was at Georgia, we used to play intramural.
Yeah.
At Stegman.
Oh wow!
Which then they built that big
Ramsey.
Yeah, the big place out there. But one of the ones at Stegman had a carpeted basketball court in there.
Yeah,
it was pretty brutal.
Rug burn.
Yeah.
Maybe don't sell out for the rec league.
No.
So you grew up playing basketball, and obviously, were you a consumer of just all sports?
Yeah, I was actually
equal opportunity consumer.
Yeah, baseball was like the first sport I was into. Like in the '80s, the Braves were always terrible.
The Braves were terrible in the '80s.
But then they had this one season, '82 or '83, where they were great. All of a sudden, they started out. They won like their first 14 games of the year, and Dale Murphy was like an MVP candidate. Yeah. Joe Torre was the manager, and that was the first time I kind of got interested in sports. And so I'd watch the Braves a lot. We had an older woman who lived next door with her husband. And the husband had Alzheimer's and wasn't really active and stuff. So the older woman just watched him constantly. And I would go over there and watch the Braves with her every night because she couldn't really leave the house and do anything. So she would watch the Braves every night. And so every night around dinner time, I'd go over there and watch the Braves with her. And I started watching the Braves a lot. And then basketball came along probably a couple years after that. The Hawks were pretty good. They had Dominique Wilkins. They were exciting.
Right.
The Falcons always stunk.
Hey, they had the Dirty Birds eventually.
That was later.
That was much later.
Back then it was Steve Barkowski and William Andrews. They were terrible. But Georgia was pretty good. I remember Herschel like leaving to go to the USFL.
Right.
And that was like a big deal. Like
New Jersey Generals.
Yeah, it was on the news. He hooked up with Trump before now. But that was a big deal at the time. I remember it being like on the news when I was a kid. Like, the breaking news, Herschel Walker is leaving to go play football and in the pros.
Now, was you or your family University of Georgia fans or
Tech fans? Really, my dad had gone to Georgia State and then gone into the Army during the Korean conflict, and he never graduated. But he was always a Georgia Tech fan and a Georgia Tech basketball fan, really specifically. And that was like in the 80s, Georgia Tech basketball was really good. That Bobby Crimmins was the coach, and they started to kind of have this tradition of being good. They had Mark Price and then John Sally and all the way through.
I forgot John Sally was at Tech.
Yeah, but then it got to like Kenny Anderson, Stephon Marbury, all these other guys. One of my high school teammates, Martise Moore, went to Tech and was the ACC Rookie of the Year. So there was all these, Georgia Tech basketball was good for a long time.
So Marbury was there when Camby was at UMass,
probably.
Right?
I mean, Marbury was there in like 95, 6, something like that.
And then he went to Minnesota and played with Garnett.
Yeah, he got drafted by the T-Wolves. He was only there for a year, I think, at Tech. Yeah. But yeah, my parents were Georgia Tech sports fans mostly, and my dad, they eventually got Georgia Tech basketball season tickets and would go to all the games. But I was sort of, I didn't care. I went, the first basketball game I ever went to was a Georgia Tech game. But then later, I started watching Georgia football, probably like when I was like middle school, high school, and became a fan more of that. I think that had to be like the late 80s, 90s.
So I guess the one sport that we sort of haven't talked about is hockey.
There wasn't a hockey team.
I mean, the Flames were
here,
and then they had left by.
And then 80? In like the late 90s, the Thrashers started there.
So yeah, so that was
It was right when I left to go to
Yeah.
New York. So like there was no hockey team there. They had a minor league team for a while, the Atlanta Knights, and they had
that was IHL, wasn't it?
they had a female goalkeeper. That was like the big thing. She was like the backup, but that was like the big marketing story. It was this. Her name was Manon Romay, and she was like the one female goalkeeper. And,
It's like the Mighty Ducks too.
Sorta, yeah.
Julie the Cat Gaffney.
I never saw the second one.
What? How?
But yeah, so there was no real hockey
This
there.
is the divide. You're clearly a Gen Xer, and I'm clearly a
must be.
millennial. That's what it is. So.
But it was also like hockey wasn't really on TV that much. Like
I mean, that's true. Yeah.
there was ESPN was on, but there like ESPN2, but there weren't all these other stations. There wasn't an NHL station, like now.
Yeah.
There weren't really hockey games on to watch. The internet didn't exist, so you couldn't watch other stuff. So. So yeah, hockey was never really part of it. Soccer really either.
Oh yeah.
It wasn't really on TV as much as it is now.
I guess Alec would know more about this than me, but the '94 World Cup, in the U.S. was probably the '99 with the Women's World Cup.
I had a friend. One of my best friends went to Germany on a exchange program and lived over there for like 6 months, and he came back like totally into Bayern Munich, and that was kind of how I got introduced to it. Like that was probably in the '90s, and I started getting into it. Then when we moved to New York, there was a Fox Soccer channel on TV for a couple of years, and that was when I got hooked. Like I would just leave it on there all the time and just watch these random soccer matches from South America or like Eastern Europe or these places you don't even know the teams, but it was just fun to watch
the road flare leagues.
Yeah. So I got to watch a lot of those type of things.
I don't know. That's probably mildly insulting. But
What, a road flare league?
they seem to appear every once in a while.
Who knows?
Anyway, so where does the love for writing come from? Was that something that has just always been an interest of yours, or something you grew into?
It was just something I was always good at, basically, and something I could do. Like it was just natural to me. Like I didn't have to. It was funny because my mother was a math major, and she graduated from college I think 2 years early, and like was like very smart and like very well disciplined with her studies. And I was the complete opposite. Like I could not have been like cared less about school. I did terrible in high school. I graduated, but I did really well in the SATs and those things like that. But my GPA was
one of those students.
Yeah, If I went back and did it now, like I know, like okay, you just have to work at it. That's all, But at the time, I was like, well, I'm just going to do as little as possible to get out of this and move on. But writing was the one thing that I was always just kind of naturally good at, and I could talk, I could tell a story, and it's all sort of interconnected. Being able to do that. So it's funny because my grandmother was actually the journalism teacher at a high school in Alabama. Journalism/English. She ran the school newspaper, all that, but she and I never really talked about it, and I guess it just kind of skipped my mom and got to me, somehow. So.
My daughter wants to be an astrophysicist, so go figure.
Let her do it. Yeah.
So you went to UGA for a little while.
2 years.
Tell me. Okay, so tell me about that experience.
So yeah, when I got out of high school. I played basketball the whole time I was in high school, and my coach was like, if you want to go to like a smaller college, you could play.
This was North Fulton, right?
Yeah, the last year they combined North Fulton with another school, Northside, and made North Atlanta High School, which still is there.
Okay.
So I'm technically in the first graduating class of North Atlanta
North
High School.
Atlanta, okay.
But the coach was like, if you want to go to like a smaller college, you could go play basketball and maybe get a scholarship or something.
Sure.
But I kind of knew like that's not my future. I could chase this for a few more years, but like I'm not that good. But I knew that like writing I could do, and if I had sports writing, I could kind of stay around sports and be part of that. So I knew Georgia had a good journalism school. In high school, I was the sports editor of the newspaper and the yearbook and all that, and so went to Georgia, and my plan was to study journalism and be a journalism major and all that. And the first like 2 or 3 journalism classes I took, I probably shouldn't say this, but I was like, these classes are pretty boring. And I was like, it's not. They were teaching you like the who, what, where, when, how method, and all
inverted
these things.
pyramid.
Yeah,
and all that good stuff.
and I was like, well, can't I just go buy a USA Today and just write the same style, just change out the facts and the dates and stuff? Like that seems pretty easy. And so I did a few of those classes, and I also was taking English classes, and to me the English classes were just way more interesting and stimulating. And I thought, well, you know what? Like I'm just going to switch to be an English major, and if you can learn how to write, and then if it all else fails, you could be a teacher or something else. You'll have the certification and all this stuff. But I just thought English was, at least to me, going to be more interesting and entertaining. And it taught you, I felt like it was teaching me how to write longer form stuff, journalism is really tight, how to keep it tight and short and get the facts and tell the story. And I took like a year of those classes, and then I was going to switch my major to being an English with a journalism minor. But at the same time, like none of the other classes I was taking were like doing anything for me either. And I was like, I think I got to take a break here and figure out some other way of getting through all this.
So over your break, is that when you got hooked up with creative loafing?
Yeah.
Or how'd that come
basically,
about?
So I was at Georgia for 2 years, moved back to Atlanta, basically moved back in with my parents, and I was like, it's not working for me in Georgia. I just don't know what the plan is here, and I got to figure out some other way to do this.
How did they react to that?
They were like remarkably calm about it. Like as a parent now, like I think like what would I do if my kids did that to me? And they were like, okay, well, they had a belief in me. I think that, they trusted me to be able to figure it out. I was always pretty resourceful and self-sufficient. And I think they thought, well, like what's the point of forcing you to do something if you don't want to do it? Right. So they were like, okay. So I actually moved back to Atlanta and was kind of trying to figure out what to do. One of my good friends from high school had moved back there too. And I knew I wanted to do something with sports or writing or something. And I would pick up creative loafing and see it and think, well, I could probably write this kind of stuff. I would read like the articles in there, and especially the music stuff or the sports stuff. And I was like, I think I could do this. And this was right about the time the internet was sort of finding itself, I guess,
right.
Like the mid 90s, late 90s. And I somehow got hooked up on a listserv, and it was like album reviews that would come out once a week, these music reviews. And it was a free newsletter thing, and I liked it. I was like, oh, this is pretty cool. So I emailed the guy who ran it, and I was like, do you think I could try to write something for you for free? And he's like, yeah, sure. So he sent me some albums, and I reviewed them. But I didn't know that's why I was doing it, but it gave me clips basically to send to Creative Loafing. Mm-hmm. So I emailed Creative Loafing, or I sent them a letter, actually a hard letter. And
as was the style
at
the time.
And the music editor called me one day, and she was like, your clips are good, like you need some work, but I think maybe we could use you to do stuff. So kind of got my foot in the door at Creative Loafing and started doing, little things for them. Eventually I started writing a column for Creative Loafing, a music, like urban music column, because whoever had been doing it before had left, mm-hmm. and they needed somebody to do it. It turned out, I went to school with Outkast and Goody Mob, a bunch of the guys from that group. I wasn't really friends with them, but I knew them, and they kind of remembered my face. So when I would go to these events, they knew me.
You had at least some entree.
I had a little bit of a foot in the door. And then like Atlanta is still, like at the time, was still small enough that it wasn't that hard to just get to know everyone there, and get to meet like the right people, and you could be a phone call away from a Jermaine Dupri or whoever, LaFace Records people. And it was right when like music in Atlanta was going crazy. Like Usher was getting big, TLC, Outkast, Babyface, and L.A. Reid were there. Yeah. Like Jermaine Dupri was there, so like all that was going crazy too. So it was pretty good timing to be covering all that stuff for the paper too. So
and was Creative Loafing really the only?
It was the second biggest paper in Georgia at the time.
Which is
crazy, right? Behind the Atlanta Journal-Constitution. It was the second largest paper. I don't remember what the circulation was, but it was huge. It was some crazy number. Yeah. It's also because the internet hadn't grown up yet. So that was your classified ads. That was your Craigslist. Like at the back of Creative Loafing, it was just pages and pages of like the agate type where it's like, looking for an apartment to rent or whatever. There's just like hundreds of those things. So
It's like the flagpole in Athens,
Yeah,
but
yeah, exactly.
much,
but big.
much
Like
bigger.
it was probably like 100 pages every issue, something like that.
Wow.
It was thick. It was like a big newspaper. It was weekly.
Yeah.
And it was free. So like you would see it all over the place. So people would pick it up. And
Yeah.
so I had a column in there for a while. And then I kind of got good enough to where I went from writing little things like that to writing like kind of the music cover stories in there. And I'd interview people from, one of the first big ones I did was Chuck D from Public Enemy. He lived in Atlanta. And He Got Game was coming out, and they did the soundtrack to He Got Game. And I asked the music editor if I could interview him, and she said, okay. And it took me forever to like track down the right person and whatever, but I got him, and I did this long interview with him and started doing interviews with people like that. And I really enjoyed that. Like I grew up watching a lot of Letterman, and that kind of informed my sense of comedy, but also like talking to people. And you know, he's one of the people who actually listens to the interviews instead of like, Jay Leno would have his cards and would ask you the question, and no matter really what you said, he would just go to the next thing on the cards, you know? Letterman was so good at like having a conversation. And I like doing that with these different music artists. And they're usually pretty interesting, and they've lived interesting lives, you know, for the most part. So I did a lot of those kind of stories, started writing kind of bigger stories for Creative Loafing, like news stories, like for, you know, cover stories. And then the editor of the paper one day was like, hey, there used to be this guy, Tom Houck, who...
yeah.
Tom's awesome. And he did
He's
like...
in advertising now.
I think, yeah.
I believe so.
He did this column when you open up Creative Loafing. It was his column was like the first thing. And he was leaving. And the editor called me one day and took me to lunch. And I didn't really know him that well. It was sort of... I was like, what is this?
Am I being fired?
I don't know. Like, I was technically a freelancer anyway, so like, how are they going to...
Okay.
And he goes... I want you to take over this column. He goes, I know when you come into the office, you always have stories about like, you know, people you run into, you know, around town or things you've heard, whatever. And he goes, I think you'd be a good fit for it. So I said, all right. So I did that for about a year and a half, which was really like, it was fun. It was like, you know, the most read column in the paper. But it still didn't really get me closer to writing about sports.
I was going to say, we've talked about music and culture.
I could write about anything I wanted in there.
Yeah.
So, you know, from time to time I'd write about sports or whatever. But I knew like sports was really what I wanted to do. And I had Slam Magazine, I had seen, I was broke. Like I wasn't making much money doing this for Creative Loafing. And so I knew I needed to like supplement my income somehow. So I started going to the Kroger like late at night, and I'd go to the magazine racks and find magazines that I figured I could write for. You know, I think like, and Slam was one. I thought, I think I could, you know, this.
It's a very
my sensibility.
scientific process.
Yes. And I was poor enough that I couldn't actually buy the magazine, so I would, you know, the subscription cards.
Yeah.
I would tear those out, and I brought a pen with me, and I'd write down like the email address or the name of like the managing editor or the editor in chief on those cards, and then go home and email those people. And say like, hey, I want to write for you. What do I need to do to make it happen? Here's my, you know, resume, pitches. Here's stories I've written, And it worked. Like sometimes people would write you back, or you know, at least sometimes people would say no. But yeah, something. But Slam, they were like, you know, we'll have you do a little thing. And so I wrote a little thing, and that became a bigger thing. So then it got to where I was writing like about a story a month for Slam from Atlanta, and they would send me places. And it worked with my schedule for Creative Loafing. It was a good kind of gig to have. And then my girlfriend said, I think I'm moving to New York.
Yeah, because she got
changed.
with, was it Teen People?
Teen People, yeah.
So I remember when Isabel and I were talking about like how hard and she had worked.
Yeah.
And then she's like, yeah, and he writes an email to somebody and gets a job in New York.
I emailed the guy at Slam, and I was like, hey, my girlfriend got a job in New York City. So she's moving up there, and I'd like to stay with her. So I don't know if you guys have anything or whatever. And he goes, well, we have this open, we're creating an online editor job, and if you want it, you could have it. And I called her back, and I was like, I got
Life's
a job.
funny sometimes.
Yeah, I know. And you know, that's one thing I always tell people though, is like pretty much throughout my life, like it's not what you know, it's who you know. Like over and over and over, it's all like who you know and who this person knows and that person knows. Like, so that's how it worked out.
So what was the transition like from, you'd born and raised in Atlanta.
Yeah.
So, your experience had been Atlanta. What was it like uprooting yourself and going to, the epicenter of American media, New York City?
Yeah, it's funny because my wife wanted to go to New York because it was the epicenter of American media. I just wanted to go to New York because she was there. Like, I didn't really care about Time Warner being based there or Condé Nast or any of that stuff. Like, I just kind of went. I had been to New York previously a few times. Like maybe 2 or 3 years before that, I spent a week there. I was dating another girl at the time, and she was working in the city for the summer. So I got to spend like a week or two in the city and kind of just, walking around, feeling the energy. And it was fun, like to just walk around the city all day. But then being connected to Slam was what was really the cool part to me. Like I love Slam, and I thought, man, this magazine's like really kind of everything I'm about. It's all basketball, but it has a definite like cultural feel to it. And I love the NBA, and I was like, this is really like all the things I've sort of spent the last 7-8 years of my life consuming in one place. And so like once we got there, like even once we got there, I didn't really like have to like make friends and all that stuff. I just started working, and Slam was such a small. There was 5-6 full-time editorial people there. Like there was a really small staff, and there wasn't a lot of time to do much but work. Like we would get there and we were cranking out a magazine a month, and I was starting up the website. Like Slam didn't exist outside of a magazine, so
right.
They had slamonline.com, and that was my task, was to launch this thing. So I kind of threw myself into it and was just working.
Did you have any experience?
No,
with
I mean,
websites?
nobody did.
Well, fair enough.
Websites didn't exist.
Right.
So, I mean, there was a company that ran like the back end of the Slam website. My job was to just figure out some sort of editorial strategy, but we didn't have a budget to do it. So what I ended up doing was writing a column every day. I would spend like about an hour every morning just going through different news sites, reading about the NBA, like,
right.
And I had bookmarks for like all the different NBA team newspapers. Mm-hmm. So like the Journal-Constitution Hawks, Boston.com/Celtics, whatever. And I would just go through each one and read. And I started to like do a compendium of all of them basically every day. So like there was like a bunch of different people who did stuff like that. Like there was this Jim Romanesco did a news thing. It was like news media links every day.
Uh-huh.
Actually, Bill Simmons, who now is like the king of the Ringer and Spotify and all that, he did one for like Boston sports. There was a few different things like that. And I thought, well, what if I just did like an NBA kind of links to stories? So we called it The Links. And every day I would write a column, and we'd post it at like 2 o'clock. I don't remember what it was. Every day, 5 days a week. And I was like, this keeps people coming back, And so that was kind of how it started, and that thing took off. Excuse me. Yeah. And people were like, started coming back every day, and that was kind of how I made a name for myself in this basketball world.
So Slam was NBA wide.
Slam was like all basketball, high school, college. I just kind of zoomed in on the NBA was my thing.
Okay, so was there? Did they devote a lot of coverage, or sort of particular coverage to the Knicks and the Nets? Because the Knicks were kind of on the wane from their high, but the Nets were always on the cusp.
The Nets were starting to get good, like in the early 2000s.
Yeah.
They had Jason Kidd and Kenyon Martin. They went to the finals twice. Like they were pretty good. I grew up in Atlanta as a Hawks fan, so I wrote a lot about the Hawks. But I could just write about whatever I wanted to. We also got like people in different cities, Slam writers, and they would say, hey, I want to go to a game. So we'd say, we'll get you a credential, just go file a report from the game. Like just send me some notes from the game. Oh. And so people would go to the game and just send me a couple hundred words about it, and that would be on my column that day. I'd say, hey, let's check in with so-and-so in Los Angeles from the Lakers game last night. And they'd write something. And they'd say, oh, let's go look at the news today. And, that's the day's news. So,
right. So and did you you were at Slam for a long time. So was that your job throughout?
For like the first, that was like the first 6-7 years. Like eventually I burned out on that because like, you're writing 5 days a week.
That sounds like a grind. That's a grind.
And I wrote a book at the same time, the Braves book,
right,
about that same time. And so like I would go to work, write all morning, post a column. I was writing articles for the magazine too, so like I would work on that, come home, have dinner, and then write the book at night every day for about a year. And when that was done, I was just like, man, I am toast. Like I don't ever want to write a book again. I'm like just tired of writing. And so at Slam, you know, people left. Eventually I became the executive editor of Slam,
Okay.
which was a lot less writing, a lot more just sort of administrative stuff, editing. Like every article in the magazine would come through me, and so I would come up with headlines. I came up with a lot of different like cover ideas that we would, you know, get to make happen, basically. So it was a lot more of a creative and less like actual executing, less typing, less writing, which was good.
So while you were at Slam, this is where you were also Stryker and Free
Yeah.
Darko, which
Yeah, those guys.
and Darko. This is Darko Milicic.
It was named for them. It was a bunch of guys from, they were from all over the place. They were like grad school students. They started a blog called Free Darko because he wasn't playing on the Pistons. But it became really quickly, it had nothing to do with Darko Milicic. It was just about the NBA and their like love for it. But it was very philosophical and weird and different. And one of the books is over here. I'm going to get up for a second. They did these books. Like, the guy was an artist. One of the guys was an artist. So there's a lot of like, it was almost like, you know, textbooks.
Yeah, definitely has an old school textbook.
But it would also have these cool, like, you know, Celtics. That's the Celtics dynasty.
Right. Red Auerbach.
And, you know, I just became friends with them via the internet. And
Okay.
I hired one of them to write stuff for Slam. They did a book. They got a book deal. And the first book they did, I helped, like, edit it. He sent it to me. He's like, do you mind just reading over this? So I just read it and gave him some notes. And the second one, they asked me to write an essay for it. So I did. So, but, you know, the internet back then was, like, really... Now it's so divisive. Back then it was really connecting, you know, like it was a lot of getting to know other people and, hey, this person has a similar sensibility to me and they live in Seattle, but we can get to know each other because of the internet. So a lot of that stuff kind of happened while I was at Slam. I did a column for SportsIllustrated.com for a couple of years. The Braves book, the Free Darko stuff, like a lot of that all happened while I was at Slam, that 10, 12 years I was there.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, when I saw Darko, I was like, man, that was like I was a senior in high school during that NBA draft, and it was like LeBron James, Darko,
Carmelo,
Chris Bosh, Dwayne Wade.
Yeah.
One of these things is not like the other thing.
Yeah, it didn't work out.
It didn't quite work out, but then again, you know, Sam Bowie. So, 2013, 2012, 2013, you're, as you said, you're clearly burnt out and sort of, you know, did you go looking for something else, or was it just a time for a change? Or
the guy, the publisher at Slam, occasionally would come through and be like, hey, you know, about every 2-3 years, they'd be like, oh, we got to, you know, rein things in financially and let's figure out ways to cut costs and all that. And it was about that time they were like, hey, we're going to, if anybody wants to like go take a buyout, basically. They didn't say it that way, but that's essentially what it was. And I was at the point where I was just like, I got off, I'd take the same subway to work every day and I'd have to walk like 3 blocks from the subway station to the office. And I got to the point where one day I was doing that walk and I was like, man, I just can't do this anymore. The same walk every day. I've been doing the same walk every day for like 15 years, you know, or however long it had been, 12, 13. And I was like, something's got to give. And so they came to me and they're like, hey, we want to, it's time to cut costs again. What about if we put you like as a contributing editor or something? We'll still pay you. We'll put you under contract for like a year or 2. You don't have to come into the office. You know, it's less money, but you don't have to do all this stuff. And I was like, you know what, sign me up. Like that feels like a good way to like, it's a graceful exit strategy to get out of this. And my thought at the time was, this would be great. Now I can write about other stuff, you know, like maybe do more stuff about music or food or things I'm doing that you know, maybe new, who knows? Like I've gotten to the point where I was doing lots of different things. I was already doing stuff for NBA TV, and I doing on-camera stuff for them. Like I was on a show.
How did that come about?
Because of Slam, because of the website. Like
So they reached out to you because
they said, we're doing a show that one of the shows they were doing was a lot about like kind of popular culture and things. Let's talk about memes and things that are exciting on with the NBA. And so, hey, we'll go to Lang Whitaker. What's happening this week on the internet? That kind of thing. So I'd gotten to know a lot of them, and I told them, I told NBA TV that I was going to leave Slam, and they're like, I said I'll still write for Slam, and they're like, great, you can still do stuff for us. But the funny part was when I started like kind of sniffing around and trying to find other things to do outside of the basketball world, I got a lot of meetings with people, and they'd be like, great, well, do you want to write about the NBA for us? And I was like, no.
No, not at all.
But that was how it worked out. So actually, the guy from Free Darko was doing a column for GQ. He was like their NBA blogger during the NBA playoffs. And he was leaving to go work at an ad agency. And he said, they need to replace me with somebody. Can I put you in touch with my editor? And so he put me in touch with his editor at GQ. He and I went and got a drink. And that was kind of how I got started at GQ, was I replaced him writing about the NBA for GQ. And then eventually GQ, I got my foot in there and was able to kind of do other stuff like food. I started doing a lot of food stuff for GQ.
Right. So you're sort of moving back to what you'd been doing at Creative Loafing, which was much more culture, society oriented.
Well, I was at GQ for a couple of years, and then NBA. My son was born, and the NBA digital. I was like, I probably need to get a full-time job instead of 3 part-time jobs. And so I was talking to the NBA, and they were like, we have a position here, like, you'd be a good fit for it. It's sort of like the fun side of basketball. They had a blog that was all like the fun side of basketball stuff, and you could still do the TV stuff and all that. And so I took the job, but it meant that I couldn't write about basketball for anyone else. Like, it was exclusive to them, which I understand. So I told my editor at GQ, I was like, I can't write about basketball for you guys anymore, but I could do other stuff. And they were like, we'd love to have you still do stuff. And so I said, what about cooking, or cooking for guys who don't know how to cook, basically? And they were like, great, go. And so I started doing that for GQ, and it turned into a pretty popular thing. I did a lot of interviews with chefs, like famous chefs, Emeril and people like that, about cooking at home. And it was just kind of my whole thing for GQ was just cooking at home. And chefs about cooking at home. We had chefs come to my apartment in New York and cook, to show like you don't need a fancy kitchen to make great food. We did a lot of those. That was a lot of fun. We had like these like famous sushi chefs come make sushi, and the guy who runs all the Big Bad Breakfast places around the South, John Currents, he's in Oxford. He came and cooked breakfast one day and a bunch of stuff like that. But yeah, that all came about basically because I could write about basketball, and GQ needed someone to write about basketball, and I didn't want to write about basketball, but it got me in the door and opened the door for me.
So there's a good lesson in there for
hopefully.
Yeah. What is it? You miss 100% of the pitches you don't swing at?
Yeah, Michael Scott.
Yes, right. Michael Scott. Why are you the way you are? So at some point, you make the move. You and your wife and son make the move from New York to Memphis.
Yeah.
Now, did you initiate that, or was that Isabel and her
Neither
career?
of us really. I had part of when I was working for NBA Digital, probably the most fun part to me was during the playoffs every year. They would send me out to cover games, playoff series, basically, in different random places. And especially like those first couple weeks of the NBA playoffs, there's lots of games. There's 2 or 3 games every night, and the series are bouncing around between random places. And I would get these emails. They'd be like, hey, we need you in Oklahoma City tomorrow. Go there for game 1 and 2. I'd go there for game 1 and 2, and they'd say, all right, we need you to go to Atlanta for game 3 and 4 against the Heat or whatever. And I'd go there. And then they'd say, go this place. So it was a lot of fun to go to these random places and be at these really kind of like high energy, intensity games because it's the playoffs. Like
Yeah.
in these towns, like it meant a lot for these cities to have these games. But I came here a few times to Memphis, and that was like during the Mike Conley, Mark Gasol, Tony Allen, Zach Randolph. They call them the Core Four, grit and grind Grizzlies teams. So I'd been to Memphis a bunch. I'd been downtown. I'd seen like things kind of turning and getting renovated, and lots of development happening and different stuff like that. This was probably in like 2010, 11, 12, 13, around there. Maybe later than that. Probably 2014, 15, 16. So I'd been here a few times, and I always thought it was a cool city, but I'd only ever really been right around down by the arena, and not anywhere else. So I had been at NBA Digital for about 4 or 5 years, and we were just tired of New York. We'd been in New York for so long. Our son was turning 4, and my wife and I were like, we got to figure out a way to get out of New York. Like it's unsustainable, like financially, to live there, and just like from a quality of life, it just wears you down. Like you can't have a yard. So most people end up moving to like New Jersey or upstate New York or something, and then you commute for an hour and a half each way. And all our family was in Atlanta, so we thought, or my wife's dad's in South Carolina, but we just thought we got to get somewhere closer south. NBA Digital was based in Atlanta, so I talked to them about maybe moving back down here to the south to Atlanta. We had kind of talked about it, and then one day I got a call like in August from them that they were like, we're not going to do contracts anymore. So when your contract's up in like a month and a half, if you want to still freelance and stuff, great, we'd love to do stuff, but we're not going to do the contract thing anymore. And I was like, well, that sucks. So, and I was like, I don't want to freelance, so let's don't do that. So I told my wife, I was like, you know what, I'll just get another gig in New York for like a year or two, and we'll figure out an exit plan. And my wife very smartly said, you have a big social media following. Like, why don't you just tweet it that you're a free agent? Like when the day your contract's up, tweet it and see what happens. So I'd already talked to some people in New York. I kind of had some stuff lined up. My thought was, well, we'll just stay another year and figure it out. And I tweeted it. I said, hey, my contract's up with the NBA. I'm a free agent. If anyone's interested, holler. And 30 minutes later, my podcast co-host, Sekou Smith from NBA.com, calls me, and he's like, hey, one of the dudes with the Grizzlies is calling me, trying to get in touch with you. Like they want to talk to you right now. I was like, huh. And so a couple of teams reached out, actually, like 3 or 4 NBA teams reached out pretty quickly. And we're like, hey, if you're interested, let's talk. And this was the opportunity that just felt the best, Memphis. And like the more I talked to them, I could still write and do stuff, get to be involved with the broadcasts. I'm around the team all the time. I don't have to travel, so I get to be here, with my son. Like I don't have to be gone. The worst part of going to the playoffs was I'd be gone for like 3 months every year. So I'm here. Like I go to games. I go to the home games, but that's not bad. And then I get to also run the esports side thing too, which is cool. Like, so there's this whole esports thing.
Yeah, I speaking for myself, I had no idea that when I think of, I remember, what was it, the NBA Jam, growing up in the 90s, he's on fire and all that good stuff. But I had no idea there's trades and drafts. And,
we just traded a draft pick the other day, like 2 days ago.
I had no idea. So tell me about that, about the league and everything, how it came about, and
so
what it's all about.
Part of I don't know if I skipped over it at some point, but when I left Slam and I wanted to write about different things, the New York Times was one of the things that popped up. And I freelanced articles for them for about a year or so. And I did all sorts of random stuff. I interviewed like a pro skateboarder who was like pretty popular. I did a story about the history of the Red Zone channel, how that started, which was pretty cool to like track all that down. And I did some video game reviews for them because they didn't do video game reviews. And I always played sports video games. I played other stuff too, but mostly sports games were my thing because I like sports.
Right.
And so I had done that in Slam too, a lot of sports video game stuff. And so when the day the Grizzlies called me, or the day so the Grizzlies offered me this thing, and they flew me and my wife and my son down here for a weekend to like let us see the city and try to kind of sell us on it. And the day I went to their office, I had written a review of the NBA 2K game for that year for GQ, and it came out that day. The review came out that day. So when I go to the Grizzlies office, they're like, "Oh, well, we're starting this team in the 2K league. You know about the game. Would you want to run the team as part of all your duties here?" And I was like, "Actually, yeah, that sounds like fun, like to start something from scratch." So there's a video game, NBA 2K. Each year it changes, 2K 21, 22. It's one of the most popular sports games in the world, sells about 10 million copies a year. And the company that owns it's Take-Two Interactive. They made a deal with the NBA to start a league around that game. So there's 25 teams in this league. 23 NBA teams have a team in the league. There's 2 other teams that aren't affiliated directly with NBA teams. One's a Spanish esports company. The other one's the Australian Basketball League, has their own team in this league. But 23 of the NBA teams have a team. And so I'm the GM and the coach. I have 5 players on the team. The players all get $30,000 around that base salary a year. They get 401k, insurance, all that.
To play video games.
Yeah. And then there's a $2 million prize pool too. So they make money on top of that for the 6 months while they're in the league every year.
Okay, so this isn't. Do players come back every? Can they come back?
Yeah. So we can protect players. You can protect a certain amount of players. There's a expansion draft every couple of years. There's a draft of new players every year. So we had the 3rd pick in the draft coming up this year because of the lottery, and I just traded the 3rd pick for the 7th pick and a shooting guard from the Lakers who wanted to move up in the draft, and I wanted to move back a little bit. So I got a player and a draft pick out of it. So it's exactly like sports.
So when you say you traded for a shooting guard, you traded for
this guy named Reese,
a human being
who played on
plays
the
the
Lakers.
shooting guards.
He led the playoffs in scoring last year. So yeah, I mean, so much of it is about like personalities and the people and like finding the right fit of personalities. We've learned, this is season 6 we're going into now. Yeah. But we have a space down at the Grizzlies Arena where we practice and travel. We play games. We played the first 2 years in New York City, all the games. So we went back and forth to New York every week. Now we do most of them remote, and we play tournaments in person. Last year they were all in Indianapolis at this big facility the league built there, basically. So yeah, it's huge. It's like a real thing.
Now, is there any equivalent to this with like Madden? Or
We're the only.
Like that?
The NBA is the only pro sports league, American pro sports league at least, that has built out a league this size. I know like the NBA is really like perfect for this game because you can play 5-on-5. Like if you did Madden, like no one wants to be the left tackle, like on the football team, or like who's going to be the center, like. So
hey man, I was a center.
So it's hard to like. I think it's hard. It's high. We saw a soccer game one time.
Yeah.
We were watching on Twitch, and these guys were playing 11-on-11, and there was like all 11 people were out playing at the same time. There's 22 people in a room playing this game. But I've never seen like a league like that before. Like,
right.
Usually it's like 1-on-1 or 2-on-2. The
right.
NBA is good to be 5-on-5. So.
Well, and I think it meshes well with the especially the age demographics of the NBA's viewership. And
our league's really young. I mean, the people who watch,
sure,
you have to be 18 to play, but I think our viewership's probably really heavy, like 13 to like 24 or something like that.
Somewhere out there is a 12-year-old that's going to
for sure
destroy you and
trash talk. We have kids come all the time to like meet our guys, and like, I mean, the guys get stopped at the airport, stopped downtown, walking around. Like people know who they are. Like kids especially know who they are.
Now, like you mentioned, Twitch. Is this where it streams on
Twitch and YouTube? Yeah.
So that's. Would you say that takes up most of your? Is that your primary?
No, it's probably like 60%. Yeah, I guess it's my primary. Like that's that takes a lot. Although like right now we're in the off season of that, so it's not as busy. But during March through like September, that's kind of when it's all the guys are in town, the teams in town, and like that's kind of most.
So they're from they live all over the country,
Yeah.
but then
They're
it's
here
like
for
a
like
housing
6 months.
stipend or hotels.
I
or
get
what?
them apartments.
Okay.
Yeah, they have apartments they live in, and but this year I hired a coach for the first time. I've been like the GM/coach the last few years, and this year one of the guys is gonna who was on our team the last 5 years. He retired and he's gonna become a coach, and so I can kind of
Retired at what age?
No, he's one of the older ones. He's like 26, 7, something like that. But he's gonna be the coach, so I can kind of turn over the day-to-day to him now, and it'll give me a little more time, especially when like that's like playoff time of the NBA. And so last year it was really tough, and I had to miss a bunch of the playoff games.
Yeah.
So that'll free me up to do more of that for the
Because you
Grizzlies side.
also do announcing for the team.
Yeah. So like Grind City Media is the Grizzlies. The Grizzlies started their own media company basically.
Okay.
And that was partly why they wanted to hire me, because they were staffing that out. So like, if you think about it, like, you know, ESPN, TNT, all these people pay the NBA all this money to show the games, and that money goes to the teams. So it's smart for the teams to reinvest in themselves basically with that. And the Grizzlies always thought, you know, this is a smaller city. There's one newspaper here, a couple local stations. They're like, why can't we cover ourselves better than anybody else could do it? So they hired a guy from ESPN, Michael Wallace, who had been there for a long time. He's kind of running it. They brought in myself. Right now we have, I think, 7 or 8 people on Grind City Media. There's a morning show that streams live every day. There's an afternoon show every afternoon. I co-host a gambling show that we do once a week, sports gambling that's mostly college football. There's podcasts. We pregame every home game. Myself and one of my coworkers, we do a live stream on the Grizzlies Instagram, which has 1 million viewers, 1 million followers.
Yeah.
So she and I co-host like a pregame show from the court, like before the game. I'm on like the post-game show on Bally. We do like a little wrap up on there. I do random games I did game on radio the other night. So I do a lot of kind of just stuff around there. I do these cooking videos for Grind City Media that have become like popular. So I kind of just am always busy with something.
Yeah.
I write a column once a week about college football.
So how and when did you get plugged back in with college football?
Really when I moved to New York, because no one up there cared about college football. Like the NFL is their college football. Like in the South, you drive around, you see people with Georgia flags in their car or whatever.
Yeah.
In New York, people have like New York Giants flags or NFL flags on their car. And I was sort of like amazed that people didn't care about college football up north, and they're really more about college basketball.
Oh yeah, the old Big East.
Yeah.
So
I was really kind of got sucked back into watching, and also Georgia got good then. Like Mark Richt comes along and they start winning 7-8 games every year. And you start thinking, maybe we're good enough to kind of take that next step. And so I started watching every Georgia game, and then Kirby comes along, and so that really helped me like buy in again and like really go all into Georgia. And I mean, I was always a big Georgia fan. When I went to school there, I went to every game, and and my best friend now still has season tickets, so I go to 1 or 2 games a year.
So you mentioned sports gaming, and Alec and I were talking the other day at lunch just how quickly sports gaming has proliferated in the U.S. Now I've followed. He and I both follow Premier League soccer, and sports gaming is ubiquitous in the UK. It just wasn't here in the U.S. unless you went to Las Vegas and sat in one of the seedy little gaming rooms, but. I mean, I'm sure there are some nice ones. I don't know. I'm not an expert on gaming parlors, but how did that come about, and what's the impact been that you've seen?
I think
from your perspective.
Yeah, I mean, people have always gambled on sports here. It just wasn't legal, right? In the United States,
March Madness pools.
And like that kind of stuff. But even nature. People I knew in New York would bet on the NFL every week. Just with they had a friend who was like a guy who would take bets or whatever. Like it was never, and now it's just become legalized, I think. And,
Yeah.
you know, like in England, you could go to the Premier League games and bet at the stadiums. They had like booth ticket windows where you could go up and like place a bet during the game.
Like
or
a horse
halftime.
race.
Yeah, like, so it was always a thing. I think the fear here was always like, well, you know, if we let that in, there was this like thought of, oh, now it's going to ruin our games and the guys are going to be on a take, you know, like guys who make $25 million a year are going to take a $500 bribe. Like, seriously? So I think that was always like, there was this sort of like, you know, I don't want to say it. It's like, I don't know the word to say it, but like, I think people are afraid of ruining their sports in a way or sullying them, I guess.
Right.
So, but I think now, like, especially with phones coming along, you can bet on your phone, and there's all these apps, and all these Vegas companies now have all these different things. So, state by state, they've started lobbying and getting the laws changed. And the states are like, well, why don't we get a cut of this? It's almost like marijuana now. Like, and I think they're like, why don't we just why can't we just legalize this and make
Legalize
the money,
it, tax it.
Yeah. So that's happened in a lot of places, and happening here in Tennessee now. Like, so the Grizzlies can have a partnership with Caesar Sportsbook. That's who we have a deal with now.
Okay.
So we do a show, and it's brought to you by Caesar Sportsbook. It doesn't really change anything for me. Like, I would still like care about the lines and talk to my friends about, can you believe the Falcons are favored by 1 this week, or that kind of stuff. Now it's just easier to do.
Yeah, they're terrible. I have on good authority.
Now it's just easier to do. So.
Okay. So, what other projects do you have going on with all your free time here in Memphis?
Nothing really.
Nothing.
I mean, the other stuff, my son is just turned 10 2 days ago, so
It's a good age.
it's fun. I help coach his basketball team, which we practice 3 times a week, which is a lot. But I literally don't have any other time other than that. I take him to school in the morning. I go to work. I work all day. We have home games 4 nights a week. Cooking has always been a thing for me. That was like kind of a release in a way of like, not like let your brain unhook for a little bit. Like, I love standing there and just chopping onions or something like that, just because it's so brainless.
Something you don't. Yeah, something you don't hear every
but
day.
that's when you also like. It's sort of like you have a good thought in the shower. Like, I have
Yeah,
good thoughts when I'm cooking.
And mowing the lawn, something.
Yeah,
Just
and I'm also good at cooking. Like, I'm good at it. I can make good food and it tastes good. And
now, your wife has a cookbook. Why don't you have a cookbook, Lang?
That might be next.
There you go.
So-
I'll look for my name in the acknowledgments.
No, I have an agent, who did my book, and she's talked to me about doing a cookbook. But
Yeah.
When the pandemic started, I posted a picture of my dinner that night on Twitter. I did a hashtag quarantine just to be funny. And my boss called me and was like, "Hey, can you make content out of this? Like, we need content now."
I was curious.
And I was like, "All right." And so I came up with this idea. I cooked dinner, and I had my wife shoot it on my work iPhone, like piece by piece.
Yeah.
And I sent all the video clips to the video department at the Grizzlies, and they cut it into a video. And the social media guy posted it and put hashtag cooking with Lang. So that became the name of it. And they did 1 million views on Facebook that first year.
Right from this kitchen right over here?
On my iPhone. Which was like just crazy. Like, that it became something like that was popular and good just from there. And so now, like, we actually have a camera person and lights and stuff come in, and we film them. And now we just got a partnership with a restaurant in Mississippi. So it's becoming like a real thing. So I got to actually go down there and film a video next week. But like, that kind of stuff is fun to me. Like, that's kind of like fun to do, and it's not really work, Like, even when I go to work, like, I go watch John Morant dunk on people. Like, it's not like I'm digging a ditch on the, farm somewhere or something. Like, I get actually, it's like fun. So.
Well, you mentioned the quarantine, and I think I remember when the NBA canceled its games.
Yeah.
That's sort of like when the pandemic became real. It was like, what's this actually? I mean, there's like canceled season, canceled. It's like, oh.
Yeah.
Well, what was that experience? Now, I know we talked about the quarantine, sort of tongue in cheek, but what was that like as somebody who's job, livelihood, are these public events and bringing people together, lots of people together in close spaces.
Yeah, it was weird. I mean, I had been through work stoppages in the NBA before because they've had a couple of strikes.
Sure. Oh, yeah.
Or lockouts.
Lockouts.
Yeah, so I had kind of been through that before. And, you know, there's a fear of like, oh, are we going to lose our jobs? Like, what's going to happen around us?
Yeah.
But I think with the pandemic, you knew that all the leagues were going through it. And at the same time, like, you knew that people needed something to watch. So, like, when the pandemic happened, actually, the 2K season was just about to start, and all of my players were here in their apartments, and we were going to be flying back to New York to play the games. And then the pandemic happened, so they're like, all right, everybody just hang on. So those guys basically just posted up in their apartments. But the good thing about the esports thing is you can do it virtually, right? So like, so we got like the best internet we could get in those apartments, and all of our league games got picked up by ESPN because they had no
That's
content.
right.
So all our games were on ESPN2.
We were watching Tetris tournaments and things like that.
All our games were live on ESPN.
Yeah.
I was sitting right there at the counter with my headset on coaching. The guys were in their apartments a couple miles away, and we were playing games on ESPN. So I knew the NBA was going to figure out some way to get something going, you know, before too long because they had to. But I was busy the whole time because the 2K thing never stopped. And I had these like 6 kids living here that I had to like kind of keep an eye on, and we had to figure out how do we get groceries? Do we have to wipe down our food and all this stuff? You know, like all that stuff. Or when it first started. So I didn't really have time to like sit around and like kind of worry about it, you know. So
now, did you go into the bubble?
No, we were having our season. Some of the people I work with went to Orlando and were like, one of the head videographer guy went down there and was like in the bubble for the whole time. But I didn't.
That was a surreal experience. I'm
Must
sure.
have been wild. Yeah, I didn't.
There's an oral history project for somebody out there. Oral history project.
We went
of the
to.
bubble.
We ended up going to when the 2K season ended, like in August. My parents have a little condominium in Destin, which is like 6 hours south of here, on the Florida Panhandle.
Oh, yeah.
And my son was doing virtual school. I was working from here. The NBA season was on hold. My wife was working from home. So we ended up going down there for 2 months and just staying in this little condo on the beach for 2 months.
As long as you have internet, you
yeah,
can do
my son
anything.
did school from there. I was doing Grind City Media shows from there, just on Skype. And I was like, well, we'll go back when we have to. And eventually they figured out a way to have basketball games again, so I came back, you know. But we got to actually, like, it was, if you had to be gone, if you had to be locked up for 2 months, like doing it there was a pretty good place to be.
Do you think has there been any shift in how your job or sports media in general has shifted since the pandemic? That seem persistent or you know, changes that were made on the fly that have stuck?
At this point, it's kind of back to the way it was before. Like, we're allowed in locker rooms before games, after games. You know, we're around the players all the time. There was about a year or two there where, you know, like, where we weren't allowed in the locker room, where it was, you know, things were pretty different. But at this point, it's pretty much back to normal, it seems like.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I think that mirrors, you know, wider society.
Yeah, pretty much. I think people were all just like at the point where they were like, we gotta do something here.
Right.
Like, we can't stay like this forever. And so,
pandemic versus endemic, I suppose. How often do you get back down to UGA?
I try to go at least once or twice a year.
Yep.
Actually, the guy who was our video person for Grace Gaming is now the head content person for the Georgia women's basketball team. And so I was there like a month or two ago, and we went and saw him, and he took us around the basketball coliseum and all that.
Nice.
And, I usually go. My son went to his first game, and now he's hooked, so he wants to go back. So, you know, we'll go back next year for a game or two.
Yeah. Well, you know, UGA is I mean, we're up to 41,000 students.
I think it was like 24 when I was there.
Right. I mean, it's when I started in 2008, I started grad school, and it was like 32, 33. And you know Athens, how compact it is, and you can definitely tell just the traffic. It's like, I live in Athens, not Atlanta.
Somebody said that Athens is the only city that widens its roads with a can of paint.
Yeah, it's true. It's true. We're actually going through a very controversial lane, a road diet on Prince Avenue.
When I was there was a whole thing about bike lanes, and like people were so angry about these bike lanes that are getting added.
Yeah, the public comment period just ended.
Yeah.
And yeah, it has been incredibly, shockingly divisive, which I shouldn't have been surprised.
Yeah.
Sudden changes, people don't like sudden changes, especially when they could hurt their cars and whatnot. But it'll be interesting to see how Athens continues to grapple with an increasingly popular institution, and hopefully, fingers crossed, another national championship isn't going to hurt enrollment numbers.
I was there like in '92 when the Braves when they won the World Series. In '95, I was downtown that night, and like people just went nuts, and it was like all people were hanging from the arch and like climbing up the street lamps, and like the whole downtown just got flooded with people.
They did that during the national championship as well. There were lots of road cones stolen because there's a whole big construction project on Clayton Street. They had to tear out all the trees because the trees were growing into the sewerage.
Yeah.
So
we've had that.
Not optimal. But yeah, so.
The other thing I've gotten into, I thought about this, was since pandemic, was I've started running a lot. I've lost like 75 pounds in the last year, probably. My best friend who I worked with at Turner at NBA Digital was Sekou Smith. We did a podcast together. Yeah. And he died of COVID, like in the first round when it was first going around, before people could get vaccinated, basically. Yeah. He had some comorbidities, but he passed away from it. And then my son and I got it about a year and a half ago. We were vaccinated, but we were still like kind of, what's going to happen? We didn't know.
Sure.
So we went through it together here. And we have this woods behind our house. So like we would just go outside every day and hang out outside and play in the woods and, but we got through it. But I lost my smell and taste. And for someone who likes to cook, it was pretty tough.
Yeah.
And for someone who likes to eat, it was tough. And I just wasn't hungry, really. And I was tired. I didn't feel great the whole time for about a week and a half. And so when it was done, I had lost like 10 pounds. And I was like, you know what? Like maybe this is a good starting point. And I still wasn't hungry afterwards because I couldn't smell it. I'd lost my taste for about a month. And so after that month was up, are we getting a visitor?
Gigi.
Hey. Gigi?
She made an appearance in Isabel's.
I'm sure.
Too, so.
Gigi.
No, Gigi's fine.
Gigi. Hey, Gigi, come here.
She's just making the rounds. But no, talk about a silver lining.
Yeah, I started. Hey, Gigi, sit.
No.
Gigi, sit. Down. Stay. Good girl. Stay. So I started. Hey. Stay. She can't help herself.
Oh, she's perfectly fine.
She'll sleep right there.
Yeah.
So I ended up running. I started running and like watching what I eat, and now I run about 3-4 miles every day.
Wow.
And I'm still not quite where I want to be, but I'm like, if you look at old pictures of me, it's like I look pretty different than I did like a year ago, 2 years ago. So.
Yeah. So, now, were you somebody who?
I played sports in high school. Like I was really sporty. But then when I lived in New York, like I was just writing all the time and just sitting.
You're sitting on a subway.
Yeah. I mean, the one exercise was walking a lot around the city. You walk a lot, so I ended up burning calories that way. But like, I would still just eat because I was learning how to cook. So I was eating like crazy and eating not great, So I learned how to. My wife,
pizza capital.
Yeah. So I would eat big lunch and all this stuff, and so I finally got to where now I feel like, at least like physically, health wise, like I'm in a good place, from that standpoint.
Well, good deal. Well, I think that's a good place to leave it. Now that Gigi's here, we can.
Gigi.
Well, Lang, thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you guys.
Next time you're in Athens, come see us.
Love to.
You know, Isabel and your son have seen the library. You'll have to.
I want to see it. Yeah, we saw the Natural History Museum, which is just a room like the size of this place.
Yeah, it's a very.
But my
very
son loved
kind-
it actually. The guy gave him like a quiz to do while we were there, and he spent an hour like going around reading the thing.
Well, if he wants quiz, I can put something together.
Yeah.
You know, that's no problem. But yeah, we'll get you.
Where's
in.
your library? So the library is not the regular library, right? It's
Well,
different?
it's Special Collections Library, which is on the west side of campus over on Hull Street. It's where the old rundown frat houses on Lumpkin, back behind there, that's where the parking is now. They moved those frat houses to River Road. So, yeah, it's over there by the new Terry School of Business and the new Bolton Dining Hall.
Yeah.
So sort of a newer SEC Network. When SEC Network's there, they film from in front of our building.
I lived in my freshman year. I lived in Russell,
Yeah.
and in my sophomore year, I lived in some apartments out on like River Bend or something.
Okay, yeah. I know,
then-
out towards the golf course.
Yeah.
Yeah.
We stole a thing of golf balls one night from the golf, like a trash can full of golf balls. And
Well, I'm sure the statute of limitations is up on that. So.
well, one of my friends had this idea. They're from the range. They were just like these.
Yeah,
beat-up
it's the
balls.
yellow.
Yeah.
Yeah. the
And he
yellow
was like,
range
"Let's
balls.
go try to hit these into the stadium." And so they stole this thing of balls. And a cop saw him, or a security guard, and we saw like a flashlight running across the thing. But they got away, and they went up on the roof of the whatever that dorm is right next to the football stadium. It might not even be a
Reed?
dorm. Yeah, maybe
Reed Hall, I think.
They went up on the roof of Reed and used a pitching wedge and tried to like chip him into the.
Well, if anybody's watching this, don't get any ideas.
I do not condone this behavior.
Exactly. Exactly. Well, Lang, thank you so much. This has been a blast. Like I
Yeah,
said, come
thank you
see
guys.
us in Athens
Yeah.
sometime.
Appreciate it. Go Dogs.